Welcome back to Grind to Glorify, the podcast that forges godly men into leaders and disciples through biblical truth, spiritual discipline, and a kingdom purpose. Obviously, with me is not my twin. It's actually a wiser man. It's my dad, Chris Brown, who also wants me to refer to him, Oh Great One, which is not a bad thing to be called, I guess. So, Oh Great One is here with us today. This is my father's super important interview / conversation we're going to have. We're going to talk about what it means to be a godly man. Also, we're going to talk about kind of where he came from, how God impacted his life, and some lessons learned and some tough things that he's been able to accomplish and get through with his life with God and his relationship with him. So, without further notice, we're going to continue with this conversation. This is a huge honor to have you on. I know this is kind of new to be doing the podcast in my basement, but something that ministry has been important to me, and you know that. And I've been trying to use this to hopefully reach people and reach men, and hopefully help them get to out of the rut that I was in before we had the boys, and really trying to help men grow and what have you. And there's not another man in my life who's impacted me more than you. And I really appreciate all the things that you've been able to pour into me and Nate and Scylla. And those are my siblings, and really the impact you had on so many people. And, I think it really speaks volumes of the man you are. And there's nobody else I'd rather be my first guest on the podcast than you. So without further ado, where are you from? And kind of what's your background?
I am from Mableton, Georgia. My name's Chris Brown.
Yep.
I'm from Mableton, Georgia. 55 years old. Grew up in a house with a mother that was diligent to take us to church and to see to it that we were raised in church. She didn't always wasn't always easy for her because my dad was not supportive in that endeavor, but she was going to make it happen anyway. And so I'm very thankful for that. She certainly has had a huge impact in my life in knowing right from wrong and knowing that we ultimately answer to God. So I'm very grateful for that. I think we're very blessed, if you have a good mother, and I think that's one of the reasons that your mother and I are so excited about our daughter-in-law. We know our grandbaby's got a good mother.
Right.
We know how important a good mother is. So,
Right.
but and
That's fun.
speaking of grandbabies, there's a grandbaby right there.
Hey, bud. So anyways, that was my boys and my family. So that's happens all the time. But
All right.
like you were saying, having a strong mother's key. And like you said, it's foundational, I think, in a man's life to have a strong mother. I know.
I definitely think that there's certainly you hold your mother up on a pedestal, and at least I do, and a lot of people I know do. I think in the Bible it compared Jesus' love for us as and God's love for us is that of a mother for a child, and so where we feel loved the most from for a lot of us is from our mother. So yeah, it's important. Having a good mother is important.
Yeah. And I think that falls into having a good spouse and having a good godly woman. I know, y'all think the world of Molly, my wife, and that was one of the things that drew me to her was, my mom is some of the most hardest working person I ever know and God fearing, and she's been through her ups and downs, and we may get to that later, but I just, the most important thing I was looking for in a spouse was just somebody as spiritually and as mentally, high character as mom, and, it doesn't, when you're talking about spending an eternity with somebody, spending, 80, 90 years with somebody, you kind of want to be able to go, in a foxhole with them, when you want to go in the,
Absolutely.
in the tough times and even go, enjoy the good times as well.
Right.
And I definitely seeing you and mom and y'all's relationship was definitely an example for me to be able to find a partner, find that peace in my life.
Well, I mean, having a good partner definitely does make the tough times a little bit softer to deal with and the good times a little bit more enjoyable to be in.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's definitely being with that person that you love is a good thing.
Right.
And I think God wanted it that way.
Yeah. A little adversity never hurt anybody, right?
That which does not kill me makes me stronger, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Well, getting back to, I know grandmommy, that's what we call his mom. Grandmommy just really was that spiritual pillar in Noah's life. And I mean, she still is to this day for, I think, her grandbabies on all of us is.
I think so. And, she's always been fervent in prayer. And one of the things that I learned and, at a young age was when trouble hits that you go to God in prayer. I mean, and so anytime we had tough times, and there were a lot of tough times when we were young. Definitely didn't grow up with a lot of money and didn't have a lot of the advantages that, maybe we were able to afford, you and your brother and sister, but never knew any better because we were always happy.
Right.
Because we were never at a short for love. So that was always present in the house.
And that's awesome. I think you realizing that now in an older age maybe helped you parent and build us up was, in our family, it was all about character. And it didn't really matter what our grades were, but you were definitely going to be a high character individual.
Yeah, your mom would get mad at me. She
Yeah.
would get mad. She'd be like, "Well, do you not care what their grades are?" And I'm like, I really don't.
Right.
But they better behave in class.
That's right. That's right.
And so when I was young, I think my mother, I guess I learned that from my mother. We used to get grades for your grade and a grade for conduct. And so if I brought home a D or a F, which I didn't do very often, but if I brought one of those home in my grades, it was not necessarily life changing or a big deal. There wasn't going to be a lot of punishment that came with it, but you let me bring home a C in conduct, and the heads were going to roll.
Yeah.
The hickory switch was on duty.
Yeah.
Per se. So we had to behave. That was a prerequisite of living in the Brown house.
Yeah.
You had to behave, and so I felt like that was important. To teach y'all that it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to behave and be nice.
Right.
We wanted y'all to behave and be nice, and that's what I wanted. And it did frustrate your mother at times. He hadn't turned in that. Well, he's going to fail. No, we're just going to let him fail. And I was always like, yeah, we're just going to let him fail.
Right.
And she wasn't good with that concept.
No. Well, and I was really good at doing my best to try to fail. I was a good.
I thought your first year in college, Lordy.
There's a reason why they call it a victory lap or a fifth year, because I definitely needed that.
Yeah.
And they were happy to take my money for that last year. Well, your money, I guess.
They were glad to have it.
Yeah. They didn't fight that too much, did they?
Yeah. But I will say, I think every child needs to know that anytime they do wrong, there's a good chance their dad is getting ripped at home for their shortcomings.
Yeah.
And so I always tried to tell you guys to understand that it was the old, what was it, the drainage, it's like plumbing.
Right.
If the crap rolls downhill onto my back, I was going to make sure it landed on y'all's very shortly thereafter.
That's right. And you're pretty consistent with that.
I was. I did not like getting in trouble for you guys not doing your homework.
Right.
That was frustrating.
Yeah, you talking about those spot jumps were for a reason?
Yeah, you got plenty of those.
I did. You were really working on my physical education.
I was physical education as well as the mental concept, accountability.
Just well rounded. I really appreciate that.
Welcome. You're welcome.
Well, going back, we talked about grandma being the spiritual foundation, really kind of our life and kind of what that little mustard seed did and kind of into my life, into the boy's life now. Where do you think that maybe your relationship with God began and your mustard seed started and that foundation started to grow in your life?
I guess around 7 or 8, I remember my mother it was so important to her that we would go to church. And at the time, my dad was adamantly opposed to it, to the point where my mother didn't go to church. But she had a friend, and she would wake us up and get us ready and carry us to her friend's house so that we could go to church with her friend. And that was a couple of years before my mom finally said, I'm going to church. And, she decided that she would fight that fight. But even before she was willing to fight that fight, she was going to make sure that she fought the fight of getting her kids into church.
Right.
So we went the first few years, we went without our mother, until probably 9 years old.
Yeah. And then did seeing her fight that fight, did that make your relationship maybe a little more important to you at that time?
I think you just saw that was something that your mother wanted for you. And you knew she loved you and she wanted the best for you. So
Right.
I think you knew then that it's important.
Right. And I think her doing that's not something she did for all of us. That was something she did for all of us.
She did. And I remember when you all were born and certainly with a toddler in the house and then after your brother comes along, you got a toddler and an infant and all that. I remember saying, Christopher, now you need to have those boys in church. And so I'm like, I get it, Mom. She said, now are you going to skip their dentist appointments? Are you going to skip their doctor's appointments? And I'm like, well, no, ma'am, we're not going to do that. She said, well, you take them to church. It's a lot more important than the doctor and the dentist,
Mhm.
to go
Yeah.
learn about God. And
Right.
so that hit home. And so we tried for the most part of y'all's life to make sure that getting up and going to church was something that we were going to do just to expose you all to that. And to bring you up in the church was important to me, and important to your mother.
Right.
And I definitely think that that was because grandmommy, encouraged it and wanted it to
Right.
happen.
And I know, like, for us, I remember it was like maybe casually going to church before 5th grade. I really remember when we started going to West Metro that we kinda went to, like, we were going every Sunday, that changed, and that could be just me not having good memory, but I know we went to the Tabernacle for, some time as
We
well.
did when you were real little. We did, and but we were spotty back and
Right.
forth, and actually loved it at the Tabernacle Baptist Church. We loved it there, but we allowed that pillow monster and
Yeah.
that sheep monster to grab hold of us on Sunday mornings, and after we our membership kind of waned or our
Mhm.
attendance kind of waned, your mom and I was like, we can't continue to go down this road. And so
Right.
we got locked in at West Metro. And
Mhm.
obviously there were a lot of people there that I had known from being younger, the Grays, and all was important. And your aunt had decided to go there as well. And
Mhm.
so it made it easier for your mom, I think, to go. And then obviously if your mother's happy, then everybody's
Everybody's
happy.
happy.
So it made it a little bit easier, and that just became our church home and has
Yeah.
stayed our church home.
How did bringing your boys to church, how did that help your relationship with God?
Well, I think, you go and you go to church and they hear things and you realize that, you better live it that way as well. I think there's a little more accountability when you got little eyes upon you
Right.
as to how you respond. I know that I
Yeah.
can have a temper at times, and
Nah.
sometimes I don't do a great job of necessarily watching how my tongue presents itself in
Mhm.
public and certainly around the house. But I think that going to church and raising you all that way and not allowing you all to do it was some accountability for me.
Right. Yeah, I definitely see that with the boys, and, you start learning that, do what I say, not what I do, and then, well, then I probably shouldn't do it if I don't want you to
Yeah.
do it. Yeah, I definitely, even with the boys being so little, I'm really convicted with how I spend my time and how I love their mother and
Well, and I remember you were playing with your cars upstairs, and this was before Nathaniel was born, but you were playing with your cars upstairs and you got mad and you threw one against the wall. And when you did, you yelled, shit. And your mother looked at me, and I knew that that had come from me. And so
Right.
I knew you got to do better.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, you got to do better.
And I never cussed once after that. I
No,
was a saint. I did not pick up that
yeah,
habit one bit,
yeah.
or maybe I did. Who
And I
knows?
would love to say that I never use profanity, but obviously anybody who watches this
Yeah,
knows that that's still a struggle that I
right.
have. But there was a long time when I feel like I did a fairly decent
Yeah.
job
No,
in the house.
and I definitely think there was a point where, it didn't come as often, so when it did come, there was a lot more, bravado, or there's a lot
Uh,
more weight to that,
well, I think once y'all got to a certain age, you earned it a lot more.
Yeah, or, running home or what have you,
Yeah.
we definitely, when
Well,
we
you
got
got to be
older.
creative in your discipline for
That's
sure.
true. Yeah, I definitely figure, we earned a lot of the punishment that we got, especially growing up with 2 boys. But no, I definitely think that accountability piece is something that, is big here with us, because I know for me, I didn't have a whole lot of accountability before Christopher. I had the boys, I had Tristan and all of them, but that's not immediate accountability.
Right.
I felt like whenever Molly said we were gonna be parents, I immediately was like, "Well, I think I'm out of shape. I can't really get up and go." And then spiritually, I was just exhausted from, doing the things previously in ministry, and I just, like, realized that, I am gonna have some accountability shadows just walking around, and,
Right.
and that was the thing that really jump started my growth because, I talk about I wasn't doing anything bad. I wasn't a bad husband. I wasn't bad, but I was good enough. I wasn't really fulfilling my potential. I really
Right.
didn't feel like I was doing life with a purpose. I was just going through the motions. And then,
Right.
yeah, when I found out that we were gonna have Christopher, it was a huge, eye opening moment of like, you look, I physically remember looking in the mirror and be like, that's going to be your, son's father, and being like, well, I don't want that guy to be
Right.
my son's father,
Right.
so a lot of things had to change for me. And I do think that it's simple, they don't know they're holding us accountable.
Right.
They just think it's awesome, and they're just willing to watch you or whatever that may be,
Right.
but I know for me, being a father, I think it allows me to appreciate the sacrifices you made getting us to church on Sunday. And that's something that, Molly, the first couple of years, I was working weekends. And that was one thing that I'll always be in debt for her for making the time every Sunday, even without me, to go to church with them.
Well, and I tell you what, being a grandparent, the fact that Virginia is what I call Molly, but the fact that she would get up and take Christopher even when you weren't going was, I mean, something that just stood out to me and your mom and your grandmommy and all, and just because it isn't easy.
No.
It's not easy to get kids up and ready and going. And I try to share. We've got a couple of younger couples in our small group Bible study, and for them to get places is a different task altogether than it is for your mother and I.
Right.
Now, your mother and I, when it's time to go, we go. Now, we're late a lot still because of your mom.
Right. I was gonna say
Yeah, throwing her under the
That's
bus.
right. You're
And
not
this is
on time.
no, like this podcast will last forever, so
Yeah.
she knows
Yeah.
you're late a lot.
Yeah.
But um, what they have to do to get 3 kids up and going and get them to church on Sunday, or to get them to small group Sunday evening, or to get them to school in the morning, that is a task. That's a chore, I think it's neat. I've grown so much respect for them, the Prathers and the Hollands, just because, man, they are willing to do it, and they do it with joy in their heart,
Right.
and they show up all the time, and they show up for their family at church, and they show up at small group, and they do all those things. I know it's not easy because I walked down that road, but they continue to do it. Lance Holland, he said, I know y'all look at us, we come in late. And I said, buddy, every time you walk in late, I think that guy's just ran the gauntlet. And I'm so proud that he's willing to do that for his kids.
Right.
I think it speaks to his character and his integrity that they show up, because it ain't easy, and whereas it is when you get to be my age and you have no kids in the home.
Well, and you have, and no one, there's no accountability for, no one's going to blame you for, hey, we couldn't make it out the door. You're like, all right,
Absolutely.
cool, no
Yeah,
problem.
you could. Yeah.
You don't have to run through the gauntlet to get your kid to church. You don't have to, like, you could just throw the blanket, hey, so and so did this, and everybody would be like, cool, like, we get it.
Yeah, and nowadays you could pull them up in the living room and flip it on the internet and
Right.
watch the service.
Right.
You could,
Right.
but they're practicing that just like you all practice that.
Right.
And I was so proud that Virginia did it when she was running solo,
Right.
because it is always easier when you split it. You think about all those single parents out there, the battle that they fight, how much tougher it is for them. It is a tougher road for them.
Absolutely.
It is. That's why God meant for us to pair together and raise children together, because you can lighten the load, and so have so much respect for those people who go at it alone. And then to see my daughter-in-law not missing a beat, was just something that you so much respect for.
Yeah. It never begrudgingly, always with joy, like you said with Lance, and that, like, she always did it with a heart that, like, this is just what we do. It's just what we do.
Just matter of factly did it. And I know she was raised, well in the church by her mom and dad. And so I know she knows that's an expectation of raising kids, because that's what her parents modeled for her.
Right.
I mean, she wasn't going to keep you being away or you being at work from her kid going to church.
Exactly.
And so neat, just neat. And you just love it. And when it's your grandbaby that's going, you feel even more special about it. The fact that they're willing to do that.
Yeah. Well, and because you don't have any control over that situation. So
No
it's
control.
just like, that's probably, you feel like it's answered prayer every time it happens, because you don't have any control.
Right.
over it.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and that's awesome. And I think, going back to that is just, I think as men, I think it's easy for our wives to serve a lot of times and not us, because, we go to work, and then you go to work and your wife's taking care of the household the whole time. Then when you come back, you just assume everything's taken care of.
Well, and I think inherently as men, we're more selfish than women are.
Yeah.
I truly believe that. I mean, I think if you look at probably 90% of the problems in our society stem from selfish men.
Right.
And so that's something that we need to we need to be better at.
Right.
Really do. I'm not saying there aren't selfish women out there, but what I'm saying is the breakdown in our families most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, more times than not, is caused by selfish choices by men,
Right.
young men and old men alike.
And that's something that I realized how selfish I was going from being single to married. And then you realize, like, oh, I can't spend all my time on Xbox. I can't spend all my time doing what I want to do. I have to go spend time with my spouse. And then even more so being a father, you realize, like, hey, whatever free time you thought you had, you don't have it.
And so it's not always a good time to go out and throw the baseball back and forth or to push them on the swing and stuff like that. You don't feel like it, to be honest with you, very seldom do you feel like that's
Right.
something fun for you to do, but you need to do it.
Right. And I think making that a priority, and that's something personally for me, is I have like a mental checklist every day. And it's like, have I spent time with the family? Have I gotten the word? Have I had quality time with Molly? And then if I've done all of that, then I get to go do what I want to do. 10 times out of 10, I haven't done all of that. So I could just go to bed and upset that I haven't played Xbox. But, and to say that, your family has to be a priority in your life as a husband. You can't just go through the motions. And I mean, you can, but you shouldn't, and I know that's something I never felt growing up that you ever went through the motions. Now, there were times you weren't there, but that's just because, you being a football coach, that takes up a lot of time. And I never once in my life really felt begrudging because of that, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm glad because there's definitely a lot of times when you feel guilty for the time away. I always thought it was important that I teach you all the value of work ethic and that it's important that you go to your job. When you can go to your job, you go to your job and you do the best job you can. Unfortunately, some careers take so much time that you're robbing from your children. And so you try to, you try to make up for it in other ways. And so for me, like I always had the mornings with you all.
Right.
Your mom so frequently was handling picking you up and the evening things because I was in the middle of coaching that
Right.
I always did the mornings. I was the morning person.
Right.
Felt really bad for your sister because that meant there was one way she wore her hair to school. That was where I would pull her hair back and put a
little bow
rubber band around it. But I always did mornings. And then when it wasn't football season, I tried to make sure when I was coaching other sports, like we were done in time for me to pick you all up.
Right. Right.
But
And I saw that from being the oldest, especially like at track and things. It was like, hey, we're going from 3 to 5, or 3:45 to 5, and we're done. And I'm walking off the track. Like we're not going to make this practice be any longer than it's got to be. There's only so many laps you can run.
You can only run so much. Right?
But and I think your intentionality around that, knowing that, hey, I have mornings, so I'm gonna make the most out of it. Yeah, I mean, that's something to take from. That's a lesson learned, because I know for me it's kind of the opposite. Especially with my work, I have to be at work at 6 o'clock in the morning, so everybody's still asleep except Molly, who I'll wake up when I get ready. But so I'm the afternoon shift. I'm mom. I'm I get off about 2-3 o'clock and I go again. But I definitely understand making that time intentional.
Yeah, and you and your spouse, it has to work for you all. It's going to be different.
Right.
Everybody's is going to be different, but definitely raising kids as a partnership, and that's why I have so much respect for those people who do it alone. I just can't imagine what their day looks like when they're never off.
Right.
They never have help.
Never.
And
that's something Molly and I talk about a lot, is just those single moms and single dads who are going through this alone. Like, heck, going to the park by yourself.
they're the all stars of parenting.
Yeah.
Single parents are the all stars of parenting.
Right. And
they are.
And it's unequivocal. Like, you can't.
No, it's not even close.
No.
I mean, single parents are, they're superstars.
Yeah. And I can't imagine doing it by myself or anything like that.
And then I tell you, being in education, because there's so many kids that are just awesome kids, and when you see one that's been raised by just one parent, you're just like, how in the world were you able to do all this and have this child turn out this wonderful?
Right.
It's just amazing.
Right.
It really is.
And it's awesome to see that come out, because you obviously, we think so highly of single parents, and you want it to come out the right way. You wanted them to come out with good character, good people. And again, no one's holding you. There's a lot of reasons for it not to happen. I think in adult life, something I've learned is growing up, there's somebody who's yelling you to come downstairs at the right time,
Right.
or you need to get in the car at this time, or this is the time we eat, or what have you. There's a lot of people in your life who structure it, but whenever you get out and you get into the real world, no one cares what you do because they're
Yeah.
all focused on themselves. So you can give yourself every excuse,
Absolutely. There's a lot of freedom in that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that freedom is a lot of times a trap if you let it be,
it is.
you
It is.
know,
I agree.
and I think that's where you have to start changing your mindset to going through the motions to being intentional, because the moment you start letting time use you, you're never going to be able to use the time. You're going to just let it
Right.
slip out of your hand. There's gonna be a lot of things you wish you could do. Heck, this podcast I tried to do for like 5 years. I let every excuse happen, and finally I was like, either I'm going to do it or I'm not. Either I'm going to do it or I'm not, and I need to stop worried about it. And then finally, Molly was like, "Well, I guess you should probably do it because you're bothering me about it." So but going back to spouses, I know mom being a huge figure in my life, mom being obviously a huge figure in your life. And I know there's some things that went on in my childhood, in y'all's life, that seeing you go through now as a father. I'll speak about it a little more once you talk about it, but just talk about that time going through with mom and her health struggles, and kind of how God really, how you saw God through that, or how you overcame that.
Well, obviously a ton learned, and I know what is it in James? They say you got to go through the trials and tribulations, or whatever. They help mold you and make you stronger and all that. Although I'll be honest with you, I just as soon steer clear of all that adversity.
Right.
I feel like, yeah, that was tough times. I remember the first time we found out she had cancer. For whatever reason, we had driven separately. I'm probably because of football. I had to meet her at the doctor's office or whatever to get the results. And we knew she had been having some problems, but when the guy told us cancer, and we walked immediately out of his office into his nurse's office, and she asked us if she could pray for us. So I think we were probably 2 minutes into the fight with the cancer when we started our prayers and started being fervent in our prayers. But I'll tell you, probably the biggest thing I learned from it was my prayer life. Before, I never wanted to seem arrogant and ask God for my way. I always, I wanted to make sure that everything was God. What is your will? What is your will? Let it happen. What is your will? Let it happen. And we had a preacher come in and he said, we're going to ask God for exactly what we want. God knows what we want, but we're going to vocalize what it is that we want. We'll be good with whatever answer he gives us, but we're going to vocalize what we want. And I think from that day forward in my prayer life, I have always asked for exactly what I wanted, because I can't hide that from God anyway. He knows what I want,
Right.
And I don't want to sugarcoat a dance. And I think with that, asking God exactly what I want. Then in my prayer life, I have become so much closer to God, because now it's not me over here trying to say the right thing or do the right thing. Now, from that moment forward, I feel like my prayer has been a conversation with God. So, always been great conversations. And
Right.
there were certain times when maybe I hope I was not disrespectful, but I certainly spoke my mind,
Yeah.
to God and going through all that. But he does make us stronger through the trials and the tribulations. No doubt that he does. And
Yeah.
certainly solidified a lot of things for us. Gosh, your mom and I grew to love our church family even more. Um, uh, you have dear friends that show up in times of need that are revealed as you knew they were a blessing, but then, in times of struggle and times of need, man, they they uplift you so much, but you learn a better appreciation for them. A Gray and Timbo and JD and Sharice and Dawn and Lauren, those kind of people, dear friends, and then obviously my brothers and their spouses, just how good they were. I remember, you don't know what to do. Your mom's laid down. I remember your Uncle Scott and Aunt Shelley came up, and Shelley and Grandmommy, they washed your mom's hair. Well, I didn't think to do that,
Right.
but man, she was so grateful to get her hair washed, and never thought to do that. Not that I wasn't trying to tend for her or care for her, but that wasn't one of my thoughts. And
Right.
and when they did that, your mom, it's like she just perked up, So dear friends, they just seem to show up when you need them, and and God shows up when you need him, and I think God throws those people in your life, you know, at the times that you need them whenever you feel like things are the most dark and gloomy. He just puts somebody in there that's carrying a candle. It'll help light things
Right.
up a little bit, and he takes care of us those ways. But I think your mom and I, in the next few times, you know,
Yeah.
that she had things with the breast cancer, you know, we were quick then. We're going to you, God. It's
Mhm.
what we want, and give us guidance. And for those of you who have never dealt with cancer, you have 875 options, and
Mhm.
people are asking you, how do you want to handle this when it comes to cancer? And,
Right.
you know, I remember a doctor with the first bout, you know, how do you want to proceed, Mr. Brown and Mr. and Miss Brown? How do you want to proceed with this? And I was like, man, I'm a PE teacher. I want you to tell me how
Yeah.
I'm proceeding with this. So you're giving me options. Well, we did learn. And so as we got later on, you know, when you start having radiation options, chemotherapy options, and stuff like that, you became very much became advocates for her health and her body as how we dealt with the cancer. But God, you know, was always instrumental in helping us do that.
Yeah. And I think, you don't truly know who your real friends are till they have every excuse to go away, right? Or till they have every excuse not to show up. And whenever you got tough times, you really start figuring out who's what, and
Well, I think people who are dear friends, they're close enough to you that they have no idea how to help,
right.
but they want you to know that they're there.
Yeah.
You know, and had a chance to share a story about two guys in the war in World War One. They were in the foxhole together, and ever so often they would be given the charge call where they had to go up over the out of the foxhole, the big trenches that they built in World War One, and they'd have to go over and they'd have to charge. Well, inevitably those trench holes didn't change a lot for years on the fronts in World War One. But one time one of them didn't come back. They were best friends, and one of them didn't come back, and they had all retreated back to their trenches, and the one guy started to go up over, and the guy that was in charge, the colonel, the captain, or whatever, said, "You're not going back into the firing line." He said, "I am. My buddy's still out there." He said,
Right.
I'm going." He said, "No, you're not going," and he went anyway.
Right.
And when he showed up, his buddy's laying there in the mud, and he said, "I knew you would come." And so, dear friends, you know they will come. And so, what I try to tell people is, you may not be able to drag me out of the mud, and I may not be able to drag you out of the mud. But if you're a dear friend, it means something that they're willing to come sit in the mud with you. That
Yeah.
means something.
Does and talk about that ministry of presence of people who are just willing to be in the mud for you. I know during that time that person for me was Kevin Billups, the youth minister at the
Yeah.
time, and he'd just come over and shoot basketball with me, and he would just be there, and I know from my ignorant teenage point of view, I know from my point of view, I had only seen you cry like twice, and that was when your father passed away and when mom had cancer. So I knew when you called us down, me and Nate down, and you were boohooing, I was like, this is not good. Like, I don't know what it is, but
Right.
I know if you're crying, I need to be crying and I need to be upset because you just were very stoic, and you still are, unless it's with your grandkids, a very stoic person, and I think, growing up in that time, I was very ignorant in my relationship with God. I knew of it, and
And you were young,
yeah,
you were young, so and it wasn't going to be easy for you to comprehend all of it. I know that, but yeah, people like Kevin Billups and all that took an interest in you. What a blessing
oh
that
yeah,
was, and God just sends blessings.
he,
He does. We don't always recognize them as the blessings, but He does send blessings
right,
to us to get
yeah.
us through those tough times.
If you're not going through a tough time, but someone is, be willing to go get in the mud with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important. I really do think it's important. I think we do it lots of times for dear friends, but what we don't understand is there are some people out there who don't have the dear friends, and so as Christians, we're called upon to go get in the mud with them.
Right,
I
right,
think that's kind of our charge.
right. And I think trying to glorify, we're here to build godly men, and I think there's a lot of godly men who don't have that, who don't have dear friends, who are amiss and who would really need that. And if that's you, feel free to comment, and we'll be that for you. We'll find people to pray for you. We'll find a church near you to help you out. Because I think everybody needs to have some dear friends, needs to have a community to rely on in
You
tough
do.
times.
This world's too tough, and the devil knows where you are, right?
Right.
He's gonna hunt you down, and if he feels like you ain't got anybody right now, and it's always easier to fight a battle with more people,
Right. Right.
in the fight, and so you need those people, you
Right.
do.
And that's something that, going back to you just role modeling things for us, you did have A Gray, Timbo, JD, and all and their wives and their spouses. So you always kept high character, high quality people in our life because that's who you surrounded yourself with.
Yeah, and again, that's just God looking out for you. I've been blessed. I've got people that I call dear friends, the Andy Dorseys of the world,
Right.
and I mean, there's so many of those people that I call dear friend that God's put in my life that I feel like, what is it? It says in Psalms 23, my cup runneth over. And when it comes to friends, wow, boy, my cup runneth
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. And they're all good. Like they're
Man,
good men.
they're
Like,
good men, and they're a lot better than I ever deserved, but they have been a blessing in my
yeah.
life.
And that's been something that has resonated in my life is to find good men, eh,
Yeah.
to be that. And that's where you get the Tristans and the Wesleys and the WDs and Kips and
Yeah,
that group because
absolutely, and it warms my heart to see you and Nathaniel, having those men with you, and Silla Marie has a couple of people too,
right,
and it's nice. You really need. I've always said this. You got to have one good friend. You
right,
got to have one. I don't know if you can make it through the world without one good friend. A lot
right,
of people that ends up being their spouse
right,
is that good friend, but it helps to have somebody that's not your spouse
hmm
be that good friend.
right. And I think that's where community comes in because, like you said, the devil knows your address. He knows where
And
you're
he
at.
knows where to find you, man.
Yeah.
He knows where to find you.
But I always thought, it's always better to. You never want to go to war alone, so you might as well have two or three with you to go with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think this life can be a battle sometimes. It can be war.
I mean, and I think maybe it's set up that way, though.
Yeah,
It's a testing ground, a place for you to, it's a separating ground.
for sure. And I think, personally for me in my life, I saw that a lot. The difference with intentionality. Like I said, I didn't really know God personally, like in middle school, and mom was going through that. But I know like my relationship with God, obviously going through high school and college and this last bout with cancer, having Molly by my side during it, there was a lot of times, having Molly with me to just be a sounding board, to be
Oh, yeah.
to be in the mud because I didn't have that before. I just think having Molly there with me during that time really allowed me to process process the diagnosis a lot better because growing up I didn't know what stages were. I just knew that mom had cancer. I just knew you being upset, mom being upset, we're all crying. Like I just knew back then cancer was death. Like I just knew
Hmm.
that mom was gonna like we weren't looking for a cure. I just knew in the back of my mind that we were just counting days, and that's really how my not as I got older, I knew that wasn't the case, but emotionally that's how it felt a lot
Right.
until this last bout. I really think talking with Molly and it was like I really felt like I was gonna lose her again. I really did.
And I think maybe it's because your mom's so diligent to do everything now, and I know she's having some issues right this moment.
Right.
But maybe it's arrogance. Maybe God's delivered us on this front, 3 times, 4 times that you feel like I know that we can get through it.
Right.
But yeah, the first time. Now it was like I said, maybe the worst day in my life. The first day I do remember a time when your mom had a hysterectomy, and the doctor told us he thought that cancer had spread into her cervix and ovaries, and which didn't end up being the case. You guys were actually playing a game that night at Pope High School. I don't know if you remember that, but
Yeah, that was the only game you missed.
yeah, no, I actually ended up
Oh,
making it to
oh,
the
you
game.
did. You missed the warm ups. That's what
I
it
did. I
was.
missed warm ups and
Mhm.
showed up for the game. Um, and I and the reason I came was because I couldn't sit around the hospital because I was in such a
Mhm.
bad spot. I felt like maybe being at the football game would take my mind off it for a
Right.
little bit. But I remember you talking about like the weight of the world just got lifted off of you.
Right.
That was an incredible feeling. But when he told, after we'd already been through all of it with the colon cancer, when he told us that he thought, that it was cervical cancer,
Mm.
that was that was a bad day. That was, but the first time when we first found out she had colon cancer, I think that'll rank as one of the worst days in my life for sure.
And she was so young too.
She was very young. Yeah, very young.
And that I think that's what was even more surprising about it too.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, diagnosis anytime's a surprise, right? But
Yeah.
I know I always remember that football game because I actually got to like lead the thing you did the whole
Yeah.
time because we all looked around and I was like, I guess I got to do it, you know, because they're all looking around like, who's doing it? I was like, well, I'll do it. And that was the highlight of my high school football career because I don't think I played another down or even a down. My mom always said I was the best teammate. It's not the best athlete. So the news, though, probably shook Dorian's football, you know, shook his mindset on the playing field. Didn't really shake mine. I was still carrying the water and cheering on. So I was pretty good. But no, I do think that, you know, God reveals himself in blessings and with people and like prayer. And I think you do get a little arrogance because you just know how big your God is. Not that you had any control in it, but
Right.
like God just continues to deliver you. So the last time you probably approached it with a little cockiness, which is
Yeah.
not because of anything you did, because
Right.
you just knew how many times God was going to deliver
Right.
you out of it.
Yeah.
And that's like this last time it was talking to Molly. She had a very similar conversation with me, and you know, for me, it just always went back to like that mindset of eighth grade. Like every time we got the news, it wasn't like I was older getting the news. I mentally felt like that sixth, seventh, eighth grade kid
Right.
again. And Molly really was able to talk me through it, which she's an amazing, godly woman who just as I wouldn't be the man I am today without her. I tell you that.
Absolutely. Well,
So
you wait till you get to spend 40 years around her, then you'll see that she shapes everything about
Mhm.
who you are for sure.
Yeah, and
That's what mother has for me.
yeah, she's been a blessing, and I tell her all the time I'm so happy that she's just the mother of my boys,
Yeah.
you know, and I was like I can't think anybody better to be the mother
Well,
of
and
my
then you think
boys.
about it from your mom and I's standpoint, how happy we are that she's the wife of our son,
Right,
and
right,
so we kind of get twofold
yeah,
for it.
yeah,
Feel like it's such a blessing.
right, and I can't take credit for it because she told me no the first time I asked her
Yeah.
out. So
Yeah. I always said this about your mom. You catch them in a weak moment. If they're a good enough woman, then they'll stick with you.
That's
You
right.
know?
That's right. I tell her about it. You know, I tricked her, and they were like, you know, it was 7 years a couple weeks ago, and I was like, it's 7 years. So apparently, it was a good trick. You know, apparently, I kept her
Yeah.
going for this whole time. You know, back then I did have hair, so maybe you know that was
That
always a
was
reason.
it.
You know, I don't know if it ever flowed like Nathaniel's. I think I just had it
Yeah.
short. I was holding on tight for it for a while, but no. But going back, I think you know we talked a lot, and I try not to cry a lot, but you know I do think you know, seeing you as my father go through that shaped me and my faith because especially now being older, but like I remember giving rededicating, giving my life to Christ in college and really understanding what it meant to follow Christ. And I couldn't imagine what people do without God on those
Oh, I
worst
can't.
days.
It's kind of like we talked about being a single parent, how tough
Mhm.
that is. I can't imagine getting through this world without God.
Right,
I just can't imagine.
right. And that's literally like I keep, you know, there's a pretty foundational moment in my life where, you know, I shared the gospel in college and really just gave my life to Christ. And, you know, those 4 or 5 years at Georgia Southern with campus outreach was foundational to me. But I always remember telling the story just like how well you led our family during that time. And I was talking to somebody, you know, things happen for a reason. And I never wish cancer on anybody or anybody else.
Absolutely not.
But I always remember this, and I've never seen this person since. I've never seen him before, but there was a guy who had lunch with me and another guy, and he had just got the same news I got in eighth grade or seventh or eighth grade. His mom had colon cancer. The same thing, mom had the same thing, and I was able to like pray with him, talk with him, encourage him, walk him through like this is what life is going to look like. So hopefully, giving him some like this. I went through it, so it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be the most you know, glamorous thing, but you will get through it. And I always remember telling like my father pray like using me in prayer because I always remember you praying with us, praying for us. Like that was something that was always on the table as prayer. Like that was always something that
Yeah.
like I saw you go to. And I know you probably did a lot more in your private time, but you know, church was so important and seeing you be a leader in the church and getting up there and praying and things just there was never a doubt in my mind that you trusted God through the whole
Yeah.
process.
Well, I tell you, speaking of being around people in a timely, just so happening to be in places, there was a old guy who has since passed that went to church with us there at West Metro. His name was Colin Hitchcock,
Mhm.
and uh, he had to have been 85 years old, 80 years old. He was a veteran, an old veteran, but he was kind of a tough guy, didn't hear real well, but he used to sit next to us in church or right in our general vicinity. And I sat beside him a lot in church. And when your mom started going through this, I knew his story. He had already lost his wife to cancer, who had been married to for years. And the church is actually built on land that her family owned. But he had lost her, Miss Hitchcock, some time before. And when he found out that your mom was going through that, I remember him telling me as we're sitting there in church, and he could see it weighing heavy on my heart. And here's this man who had already lost his uh, the love of his life to cancer, and he looked at me and he said, "Chris, there's people getting cured from cancer every single day." That's all he said, but the way he said it with such conviction drew so much strength from this old man who has every reason to hate cancer, to despise cancer, to think that it is a death sentence. For him to throw out those words and inspire hope in me, I'll never forget that as long as I live. I still see Mr. Hill sitting there saying that, wearing that green jacket he used to wear all the time.
Yeah. Like you said, those are blessings. Those are the people in your life that God sends. Him just saying those few words.
Right. And we talk about building disciples, and we all have our story, right? And so that you went through puts you in a position where you can speak with a little bit of experience to somebody who's going through it. And so we don't like the tough times. I don't wish the tough times on anybody, but it does give us a pulpit from which we can speak to. Your grandmama going through a tough divorce put her in a position to talk to several people over the course of her life since then that were going through tough divorces. Your mom, I can't tell you how many people at her work have come to her for guidance that have fallen ill with cancer, and it's put her in a position where she can talk to people and deal with people. And so, not a good thing, obviously, going through tough times, but in the same token, it does put us in a position where we can help people.
Right. And all things come out for the glory of God. Yeah, it's not all sunshines and rainbows. Adversity is tough, but if you can really lean into it, lean on God, abide in Him, and get through it, there is going to be a discipleship. There is going to be a testimony at the end of that may come when you least expect it.
Yes.
And I always think I heard this said before, and I kind of shared it around here before, but you can't call yourself a warrior if you've never been to battle.
Right.
And so to be a disciple, a lot of times the best disciples are the most in-depth relation people who have the most deep relationship with God are people who've been through it,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
you know. And I think that a lot of times, I know personally for me in my walk, I stem from that a lot, from those past experiences, from the adversity that we've been through. Heck, I just was laid off for 7 months, and it'd have been crazy. Like I was talking to Molly the other day. Can you imagine like not having God during that? Being up for the promotion, being told you got everything going for you, and then they're like, by the way, you don't have a job. And you're like, well, that's not how I thought this year was gonna finish up.
Right.
But having an unpaid internship at the church, and which is crazy because you're laid off. Who says I don't want to get paid for my work when you don't have any money? But that was a huge blessing because my wife, she supported that, because just getting clarity through that. And I was real honest with all those people, and it was like it sucked to be laid off and have to rely on your wife and go through that. And I got closer to God during that time simply because I had nothing else. Like, God, we were paid at the right time. We were given the right thing every single time. And I knew it wasn't for me. I knew like I wasn't providing. I was just praying. Like that for like literally all I had was a prayer. That's all I had was a prayer and another job application, a prayer and another meeting. Like I just was keep trying. I always remember, like I always thought there was a moment in that internship, unpaid, that had no business doing it, but I really felt God pulling me to it. And there was a moment like 5 or 6 weeks in where I was like, "Is this like, am I supposed to be doing this?" And then I was actually at a um, discipleship workshop and sitting in the table, and I just remember thinking, God, like you put me here,
Right.
like you laid me off, you gave me this opportunity, you placed me in this team to put me in this spot. Had I been working my corporate job at that time, there's no way I would have went to this. There's no way I would have been in the room to be there. So God wanted me to be in a discipleship workshop up in Ackworth, and that's where God wanted me, because that's where I was. And I always remember, like, this is where God wants me. And in adversity, God's going to give you opportunities to continue to push through and get closer to Him. And I know that the last day of that internship, not having an answer, not knowing where, the next thing was, going to that last meeting and got a call that I got the job now, and I really felt like, it was a moment of, God just saying, "Thank you for trusting me," "Thank you for obeying me," this is what I'm giving you, and it's the same pay that I had before. It's a better time, it's a better hours. I get to go to church with my wife now, with my family, so everything's better because I got laid off. But if you told me in April, like, "This is gonna be the best blessing you're gonna get," I would've told you you're an idiot. Can I get my job back and my promotion? Like,
Oh yeah. Well, I definitely understand a little bit about that. I worked for the gas company for those 10 years, and you were almost 5, and your mom was pregnant with your brother when I got laid off.
yeah,
And so God ended up making that, the best thing that ever
right,
happened to me, because it afforded me an opportunity to be a teacher and a
right,
coach. And instead of spending my days climbing up underneath houses in the west end of Atlanta, I got an opportunity to work in a weight room and coach football. And so a lot of blessings came my way from that. But at the time, when your wife's pregnant and you lose your job, and you already have a look, it can definitely be
sure,
testing of your faith.
for sure. And apparently it's hereditary because Molly was also pregnant during
Yeah.
that time, so
So you get what is it? Somebody said, if you want to make God laugh, just tell him that's not what you planned.
that
We're gonna go on God's plan.
right.
This ain't about your plan. It's about
Right.
God's plan.
Right. Well, I know we've been going, but I know, you touched on now you're in a weight room and there's a lot of things that I learned personally being in your weight room and working out. And again, I'm not a physical specimen. So obviously I didn't learn, bodybuilding
We
techniques
skipped the
or
nutrition part.
that's right. But the big thing is there's a lot of, some self-appointed adversity in the weight room. There's a lot of lessons learned through that, and a lot of those lessons kind of fall into your faith as well. So I want to give you an opportunity. How does the weight room kind of coexist with your relationship with God, and what are some of the lessons learned people can take away from that?
Well, I think the weight room is a great example of how to live. Just all about it. If you want to get better at anything, you've got to push yourself till you're uncomfortable. Right, the road to success it goes through an uncomfortable place.
Right,
It just does. You got to be uncomfortable to ultimately get better
right,
in anything. So many of the principles of weight training apply in life, and certainly in your spiritual life. The principle of specificity. If I want my bicep to be bigger, then I got to work out my bicep. If I want my walk with Christ to be better, then I got to walk with Christ. So those principles reign true. And then I think consistency too, right? I mean, consistency. You can't go lift weights today and feel like you're going to be stronger for the next 6 years.
right,
I mean, you got to go today, and then you got to go tomorrow, and then you got to go the next day, and you got to go the next day, and you got to go the next day. And so you got to continue to build on that if you want to get stronger. And that's the same thing when it comes to your walk with God. It's a work in progress always. And if you get away from it for a while, same as with God, if you get away from God for a while, then you go in the other direction.
right,
There's no staying in one place. You don't
right,
you don't get here and stay here. It's not like you build it here and it'll all go away
right,
if you quit building on it.
right.
And so same thing in the weight room. If you don't continue to lift, then you're going to get weaker. And so a ton of the correlations, I think, with strength and conditioning of the physical body are the same thing with the spiritual body.
And it's the old saying, what's a profit for a man to gain the world but lose his soul? The soul's so important. The spiritual walk is so important. So it's just taking that time to build your spirit up the same way you would, spend on your body.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important, and we neglect that a lots of times. And so there are different things that you can do that people have helped me with over the years in my spiritual walk. I think about Libby Gray giving us a book. She just gave us all a book in our small group about write 3 things every day that you're grateful for. And so if you can identify those things that God has blessed you with, it makes it easier for you to get past the trials and tribulations. Work coach with a guy now named Scott Bryant, who just had an extra Bible, and he brought it and gave it to me. Well, I've got a Bible. I've got several Bibles at the house, but you know what I didn't have? I didn't have a Bible sitting on my desk at work. And now I have a Bible sitting on my desk at work, and I read the Bible more since he's given me that. I read the Bible more at work than I have in my 25 plus years of doing it, you know, at work. I read the Bible more. So what a blessing it was that he saw that and thought maybe Coach Brown would like that and brought it to me. And so made it through a pretty good bit just in the last semester, you know, but that's all thanks to him, God touching it in his heart to bring that to me.
Right. And I think that's the one thing that, if you could do one thing to help your walk or just help your life, and that's one thing, I asked you before this was, what's the one thing that men should, implement today is that gratitude, is being able to write 3 things every day that just will help your walk.
Yes, I mean, just being able to recognize the blessings in your life is important, you know, because boy, in this world, it's so easy to focus on the things you don't have or the things that have gone wrong. But if you can identify those things that are blessings in your life, and you can do that continuously or at least daily, you will be a happier person, and it will help you in your walk. I guarantee it'll help you in your walk with God.
Right.
Identify those things.
And I think that's huge to be able to identify those things, because you're going to have every reason once you get in the storm to not look back at what God delivered you from.
Right. And I think it's important too that you're specific about it when you're IDing those things too. I tell people about things you're grateful for. If somebody says a good family, like I think you need to be more specific. You know, I need to say I'm grateful that I have a son that's willing to do a podcast about Christ and discipleship. I'm grateful for that. You know, that specific. Write that down. That specific. That is something, not just family. You know, because a lot of us are grateful for our family, but
Right.
but if you're going to do this every day, you got enough time. You can be specific about all the little details, and there is no rule against writing 5 things instead of 3. You know,
Right. Right. And I think just having something you do daily just helps everything else. If you know you're doing something daily, having a daily discipline, it's going to allow you to be disciplined in every other area of your life
absolutely,
too.
absolutely.
And I think, for me, having that mental checklist in my mind of things I know I need to accomplish before I do what I want, that helps me a lot. Being able to know that I'm praying on the way to work and I'm reading my Bible before I go to bed. Like, I just know those are things that I'm doing.
Right.
Allows me the opportunity to kind of build on those things, to come down to the weight room, to come down and work out and bring Christopher down to do his bench press too.
Right.
Yeah, I appreciate the time that you came down here to speak with us, and to share your story, share kind of where you came from, and the lessons learned through, mom's cancer and through the different times of being laid off. But I do think that there's a lot of men who have been through the things you've been through, the things I've been through, who will take something out of this. And I appreciate your willingness to do that, because men need to know that they're not alone, and they need to know there's going to be someone that's willing to be in the foxhole with them and go stand in the mud with them. And I think that's awesome. And, we talked about fervent prayer, and we try to close these with prayer now. And I was going to do, but I was going to put you on the stand if you wanted to close us out in prayer. I'd really appreciate it.
I'll do it.
All right.
All right. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much, dear Lord, for this platform that hopefully we can reach people that maybe if they're going through something difficult, God, that they can draw some strength from anything that was said or done here today, dear Lord. But most of all, God, we want them to know that they can reach out and communicate with us, God, and that we will try to go that extra mile to be with them and pray for them in their needs. And then, God, we also want them to understand, probably even more so than that, God, that they can always turn to you for any troubles that may be going on in their life, dear Lord, and they can speak to you directly. You've given us that opportunity through the blood of your Son, Jesus Christ, God, and we'll always be ever so mindful, dear Lord, to give you the honor, the praise, and the glory for that. And it's in Jesus' name we pray to you. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Pop. Love you.
Love you, man.
All right, guys. Well, that's all we have for today. If y'all want to hear more, if y'all want some more questions from the old man, let me know. Comment down below. Thank y'all for listening. And again, as always, always remember, grind hard, boldly, glorify God. See you next time.